Hi everyone, thanks for joining. We're going to get started here as we've got quite a full agenda here today. So once again, for those who have been on some of our webinars in the past, just some housekeeping. So the lines are muted, but please feel free to enter questions into the chat window or the Q&A window in the Zoom. We'll look at those as we go through the webinar and either answer them as we go or get to them at the end. This is being recorded as usual. We'll send the link out afterwards, but as always, you can find all these recordings on our blog, metricinsights.com/blog. So today is really a culmination and summary of some stuff that we've been over in the past few webinars, but it's really looking at different, as we're terming them, plays for implementing push intelligence. And what we're going to run through is kind of 6 scenarios where you can implement push intelligence to solve particular problems that you might be having in your organization. So we're going to run through these 6 plays. We're going to look at the reasons for implementing them. We're going to talk through a few customer examples and demo the end result of what you can implement here. And the plays that we're going to look at are summarized here. So again, for those that have been on previous webinars, you'll have seen some of this. For others, this may be new, but again, we're going to look at it in terms of implementing these plays. So the concept of a portal, the concept of pushing out content, the different types of anomalies and exceptions that you can uncover in the data to help your users cut through the noise. So with that, we're going to jump into it again. We typically try and keep these webinars to about 30 minutes. It may go a little bit longer as we've got a lot of content this morning, but we'll jump into it and again, ask questions as we go through. So play number 1 is the concept of the Consolidated Portal. And so again, this is the concept of being able to catalog content within your organization and give users one single point of access for any data that they may be interested in. And why would you use this? It's really if users are struggling to engage with the content that exists within your organization. Perhaps they don't know which system to go and look in, where to find it, when it updates, all of that sort of thing. And so when users are struggling to know when content exists or it exists in multiple systems and that data is not being used, that's a classic case of putting a portal in place to give them access. And as a team responsible for pushing out content, it gives you a way of really governing the user experience, curating the user experience with a set of certified and trusted content from all sources in your organization, so that again users can self-serve on that. So let's take a look at this piece. I'm going to throw it across to Louis, who, if you've been on previous webinars, as you've heard him speak before. But Louis, let's look at the portal.
Absolutely, thank you, Mike. So before we get started, nice to get a chance to present to you guys again today. For the sake of this presentation, what we're representing here, the data that we have, is from a wine store that sells wine across 8 countries around the world, across different sales channels via the web, online stores, and of course physical stores, and via several different product categories. And that company here is fully represented throughout this BI portal, this data portal that Mike was just talking about. What you're looking at right now is the homepage of Metric Insight that acts as this BI data portal. From this view here, you will realize that each and every element could be, we have several different sorts of elements that we'll be talking throughout this presentation today. Some of these elements could be metrics or KPI, illustrated in this way here. Some of these elements could be linked to your favorite business intelligence dashboard. We have a few examples here. For us, we're pretty much business intelligence agnostics in terms of tools we support. So working against Tableau dashboard, linked to business, Power BI, ClickSense, MicroStrategy, Business Object, and so on. We really have the ability to connect to all of these. And in addition to that, ability to create any sets of exception report and different types of reports that you will see throughout this presentation today. As we mentioned here, being the full organization, as you see, our content is organized for different types of business units that we have here, different types of categories. We even have a few folders where we can put our information forwards into these, and our concept of favorite content. So our categories are there, and right now I am an administrator of this particular system, so I have access to all the data within the organization. However, individual users will have access to their own categories that they have permissions to see. And within those categories, they will have filtered views access to this data. I'd like to show you one example of that in a minute. But before going there, Mike touched on a very important point as well. KPIs can be certified, and when you're putting forward KPI dashboards and reports forward, if you want to have it some kind of a certification process to make sure that everything is acknowledged and the numbers that you're seeing on the screen is actually accurate. Now, to complete my my view of logging in as a different user, is if I'm coming in and I'm a user who's representing the country of Canada, I'm the country manager, and all I care to see is all my data for Canada. Have the ability here to simulate this login for this particular users. And my point here is I'm just trying to show you that all the content that you'll see here will be pre-filtered for this user, this Canada user, this country manager, and then he has access to these specific categories filtered for his own views. So that's it, Mike, for the portal play.
So again, the idea here is that you can give your users one place to access a curated set of certified content. All our customers are typically using or implementing the portal as sort of phase one, the first play that they want to achieve with metric insights. And again, the commonality is similar to this global online payments platform vendor that we work with, where they're using this enterprise-wide. They have a variety of tools, both everything from BI tools to databases to even documents like Excel and PDF and other web applications. And based on a departmental breakdown, they want to be able to take content from across the organization that may be being implemented by different groups within the organization, have a central team that on a monthly basis is meeting to basically certify and QA content that goes out through the portal, so that again each of the users knows where they can find stuff and what they can trust. So phase one is getting that implementation of cataloging of content all through the portal. The second play we want to look at is the concept of them bursting out content. So even when you have everything in one place and accessible in one place, users often don't have the time or forget to come and look at things on a regular basis. So the idea behind content bursting is that we can start pushing out information to people. So, if you've still, as a BI team, got that constant stream of requests for new reports and data and metrics, even though that information is available in reports and dashboards that you have out there, if you've got that constant stream of requests and users are saying they don't have the time to look for reports and data, or they don't know where to find information, that's a classic case for then starting to curate that and push it out to them. And obviously the benefit for users is, they're getting that information in the place they need it, be it email or mobile. It helps you increase engagement with content that you consider as critical, and essentially frees up the BI team to perform more important analysis and analytics type tasks. So Louis, let's go and look at some bursting use cases.
Fantastic, thanks, Mike. Okay, so now we'll go to our next tab here. So taking a look at what we just talked about before, I talked about our different favorite folders or different categories that we have. Folders here is another neat way, a nice way to organize your content. It's a simpler way to organize the content and share it with additional users. So in this example here, I already have a sales of management folder content where these are all important KPIs that I would like to send out on a weekly basis to my sales manager. As a matter of fact, I would also like to add, let's add one more tile to this particular folder here, my sales folder. And there we go. Now that I have all this content, what I'd like to do is actually to burst it out, to send it out to all my sales manager on a weekly basis before their sales management meeting. So in this case here, while content is being nice, neatly organized, I can include this in a new burst, as Mike was talking about. In this example here, I'd like to put this burst. It will be my weekly sales report. And then I can select what type of content do I want to put in there. So I want to take all the tiles I have in my existing folder there, or select my individual tiles. This example here will keep our tiles in this folder, which comprehend all these different elements. And then on which schedule do I want to send this out to? So I mentioned that in my case, I would like to be able to send this out on a certain day of the week, on a weekly basis. It's actually going to be sent out on Monday morning at 8 in the morning. So people can receive, obviously, at that time, this burst of report. Then this burst can be sent via email and can also be sent via FTP servers or being saved into a shared drive. Following this, I can customize my burst as well. So I can select any types of templates that we give. We can support here we can use here the favorite top movers template. Can add my subject line, customize all of this. And one important task here is to be able to include all the different reports and dashboards that I have into a PowerPoint templates. So in this case here, I'd like to save this into my template. So therefore, when people will be receiving this burst, it will be joined with this PowerPoint of all the data. And finally, you can decide who will subscribe and who will receive this particular burst. In this case, it will be my sales management team. So it will be shared with all 4 users. So at this point, I can save and preview my burst. And to use reports 2, there we go. And then we save and enable this burst so we can preview it. And at this point, what the system is literally doing is taking all those different reports and dashboards that we have there and putting them into one concise way so I can visualize it.
Hey, Louis, there's a quick question here on how security and permissions work with this. So how do you define who sees, how do you define whether people have access to these elements if you send them out?
Yes, that's a good point. So from an enterprise security perspective, we can bring on all your users and users group together within our system, following the LDAP structure and so on. Once you have them on inside of Metric Insights, users have access to only specific categories, and they can, within those categories, they have filtered views access to their data. So they can only have access to receive information and visualize information that belongs to them alone.
And you can also tie the folder security to this as well. So as Louis said, the folders that you drop the content into you can subscribe users to those folders, and then that will define if they have access to it.
Wonderful. And here you go, Mike. We have now our burst, the preview of our burst based on the different tiles that we had put into this this folder. So there we go. At this point, there we go, Mike.
Do you want to talk about favorites a little bit?
Oh, yeah. That's a very good point as well. So as we're here talking about the this content in our folder, we find that sending a burst of content for a folder is really a great way to send information to a large amount of people. However, if you want to have content that are only going to be delivered to you based on data that you're following, that's what we do with our favorite content, our favorite folders. So when we highlight a tile or a KPI that we like from these categories with a yellow star like this, it becomes part of your favorite folders. And therefore, you can receive something similar to the burst we just looked at, only sent to you based on your favorite content.
So, two ways of pushing out content, curating it for other users, or controlling as a user what you get every day for your favorites. Again, used extensively across our customer base. We have a gaming company who uses bursting extensively, both from an executive reporting perspective, so being able to every week send out a set of executive level KPIs on a particular schedule to some of the permissions-based stuff that we were just talking about. So each of their game titles and franchises has different teams responsible for them. They're looking at the same metrics, but just for their particular franchise. That goes out on a daily basis and is segmented automatically by our platform to ensure each manager and person within that particular franchise is getting just what they're just what's related to them. So Portal, catalog the content. Play 2 is then start pushing that out to users so that it turns up in the right place at the right time for them. So we're starting to get data in front of people now, and they're starting to engage with it. We want to make sure that we're not overwhelming people with information. This is sort of the classic BI problem. You overload people with data. That's another reason that they stop looking at it and engagement goes down. And so we're going to move into a series of plays now that really start to help users cut through the noise of what they're looking at. And the first thing we're going to touch on is the concept of exception reports. So again, if users are complaining there's too much data to sift through, we're missing critical exceptions that are happening in the data and no actions being taken, it's a classic case of starting to use the platform to uncover those exceptions automatically, and again, help users cut through that noise. So Louis, let's build an exception report.
Good idea. Okay, so once you have a dashboard like this one, I like to use this as an example. Any business intelligence dashboard, this one is from Tableau, could have been from any business intelligence tool. This is a typical BI dashboard. We're having several different KPIs that are being shown on the screen across those 5 different filters. And sometimes you may want to be able to find what's really relevant and important inside of this data here. So let's go ahead and try to create an exception report. So first thing I would like to mention here, we switched the view from this Tableau dashboard to this our data set. So our data set are data that has been extracted on a daily basis. And in this case, we have about a month and a half worth of daily snapshot of our data sets here created off the data extracted from Tableau. So in this case here, what I'd like to do is I'd like to create a gross margin numeric field that is not part of the numeric field that I have in my data sets here, and from there find an exception with this. So one thing that I can do here is create a field. We'll call this gross margin. It will be gross margin percentage actually, and at this point our system allows you to create any set of calculations here. So in this case, I just want to do pretty much revenue minus my cost divided by my revenue. Here, that should give me my gross margin percentage. Adding this as a field to my data sets here, and if I apply the changes, now you'll notice that my gross margin percentage has been added to this KPI for all 2016 rows of my data.
So just to be clear what we're doing there, so we've taken a data source. In this case, it was a Tableau dashboard, could have been a database table, anything that makes sense on the back end. That source may or may not be storing history within the dashboard or table. So we're able to snapshot the data and create history, and then we're able to enrich that data with further calculations. So we've now added on an additional calculation there.
Very, very good point. And in this case here, now that we have all this data, let's say I'm only interested in taking a look at my data where my gross margin, that new field we just added here, is actually going to be greater than 40%. And if I do that, then I'm getting down to an exception list, a very healthy exception list of all my data points here that reaches over 40% based on the combination of all those different country, channel, and all the way down to product category.
So we've gone from about sort of 2,000 potential combinations of data, I think it was, Louis, that you were looking at there, which no user is going to go through that every day in that dashboard, to narrowing it down to half a dozen, 7, whatever it is, exceptions that they may want to focus their attention on.
Very good point. And then at this point, Mike, what I'd like to do is to build a report from this. So we'll call this report literally our exception report. This exception view, actually, first I need to save my view. Once that view has been saved, then we can go ahead and build this particular report on that view. So at this point, you're back to your report editor. You just want to say, hey, what type of reports you want to create, this exception view report. I would like to store this into my webinar category that I have created. And then you have all your fields that has been picked. So you want to go ahead, enable, and publish that. And since I have data that has been snapshotted, I can even fill out backfill a few instances here. And so in this case, I'll just select those particular instances from August 1st until the August 13th. And there we go. And at this point, the report is going to be created with all the different snapshots that we have based on the exception that we have just created. And here's our exception report, our rows and columns with our gross margin percentage there. And this data is daily, snapshotted daily. So now that I have that, I'll go back to the home page. We have saved this content, this particular reports into my webinar folder. And the only thing I'd like to do here is to drag it into my webinar, from my webinar categories to my webinar folder.
All right, so if we're going to push out information, let's start to narrow it down and make sure users are focused on what's important. Good example of this that we see across the customer base. So we have a medical supply company who uses us from a billing perspective. So looking at escalating issues in the collections and billing and invoicing process that they have. So you can imagine, lots of customers, lots of invoicing, different dates, different receivables dates, due dates across different regions. How do we escalate when things are out of compliance? They have a number of exception reports that looks for things like, customers that are overdue on their payments, customers that are overdue by a number of days, customers that are overdue by a month or more. Each of these reports is created in the way that Louis just showed you, so 3 different reports, but they're bursted and escalated to different users and management based on the severity of the problem. So you can see where, rather than sending that whole invoicing report out every day to everyone, narrow it down, create an escalation path, and make sure, that the right person is getting it at the right time to take action. So that's looking at exceptions in sort of the current set of data. So you saw Louis was sort of snapshotting information coming from a source, and we're saying, within that snapshot, what's exceptional today. Because we're snapshotting history, so we're taking a daily snapshot of that dashboard that we were looking at, we can also then start to look for how things are changing between those snapshots. So what changed from yesterday to today rather than what's exceptional today. And so that's through the concept of change reports. So again, you might use these if you're not storing historical data in the underlying source. So oftentimes we see reports and dashboards, so we're just showing today's data. And that then negates the possibility of being able to look at how things are changing. So by snapshotting, we're able to store that history. And then because we have the history, we're able to uncover how things are changing between those snapshots. So let's build a change report here, and then we can talk about a customer example on that.
Great. So I'd like to go back to this example again. So in this case here, we took that business intelligence dashboard, we extracted the data in order to produce a snapshotted KPI. And this is what we have here. So again, we have, in this case here, we have 2 weeks worth of data extracted from this Tableau dashboard. And now, like Mike mentioned, what I'm interested in doing, because we have several different daily iteration of this, I'd love to see what changed between one day to the next. So we have the ability to track changes between the last 2 instances that I have, and that's what this is going to do. So the changes that the changes that I want to see is Are there any massive changes in my data that I should know about? Are there any new categories or sales category that's been added that were not there the day before, or anything that has been removed as well? And I'd like to do this for each channel, country, and product categories that I have. So selecting all of this here. So in this case here, the changes that I'm interested in seeing is I would like to create a rule where I'd like to find out where my sales, the current sum of my sales, so the sum of my total sales amount, is greater than the prior sum of my total sales amount. And in this case, I'd like to see where everything has more than double. So I'll select by value by over 100%. So now what I'm doing is, in a sense, creating a criteria to find out where my sales have more than double over the past, the past few times. And now here's what I have is going from my 96 rows of data down to 5 rows of data, and you can see literally where my sum of sales is more than double in this occasion. So at this point here, I can save my change view. I will make this view public. And once my view has been made public, so it can be used by additional users, I can go ahead and build a report again. Same paradigm, same concept. This report is being, this view is being saved. And at this point, I'm back into my report editor view to go ahead and load this data. So in this case here, we'll call this my change view report. I'd like to save it in the same category again, which is my webinar category. And go in my data tab here. I like to receive all these data points here that we have. I just can go ahead, enable, and publish it, and should be able to publish it for the past 3 weeks of data within this range as we did before. So while this report is quickly being generated, taking the data off this data set and creating this element, now we have created together a change view report, and I can go back into any iteration of this and see what are the iteration where my change of my sales have more than double on any particular day. So going back to the home page here to follow our previous story, we have our report and our webinar place here, our webinar categories, and I would like to move it into this folder. So I'll put this into this webinar folder.
All right, so slightly different to the exceptions. This time, looking at changes. I think a classic use case for customers looking at sales, and we actually use this in our business as well, is where you're tracking a pipeline of opportunities that you're trying to close. You're looking at a snapshot of the pipeline every day. Typically, opportunities have a forecasted close date and an amount associated with them. If that pipeline amount for the quarter changes, you often want to know what contributed to that change. And oftentimes it's because perhaps it went up because new opportunities were added for the quarter and were forecast to close in the quarter. Opportunities might change in value, might go up or down. And some opportunities might be lost or pushed out into a future quarter. So by using that change report, you can say, okay, if the pipeline changed by 0.8 of a million, what contributed to that change, so that you can figure out what's going on there. Okay, 2 more to go. So next one, and we're getting slightly more complex as we go here, but this is the concept of what we call Dataset Anomalies. And this is really where, if you have highly dimensional data, by that I mean you have metrics which you want to segment in many different ways to try and figure out what's going on. This is common in things like marketing use cases, where you're looking at campaigns by different demographics and locations and products and etc. You have highly dimensional data, you have a lot of metrics. It's often, and you don't necessarily have alert rules that you want to be triggered on. This is a way of using the platform to look out for anomalies and outliers in that highly dimensional data, and again using that to sort of cut through the noise for users. And we do it through the concept of what we call running essentially statistical models against these data sets. So let's jump across, Louis, and look at creating one of those.
Absolutely. I love that. Take a look at this dashboard again. So for this particular example, we're talking about tracking 6 KPIs, which is from revenue all the way down here to profit. So there's 6 KPIs here, and there are over 2,000 permutation of all those different filter combination. So if you wanted, the idea here is that, is there any of those filter combinations that would give us KPIs that falls outside of 3 standard deviation? That's kind of the problem we're trying to resolve here. So loading again, going back to our concept of data sets, in this case here, we extracted all this data from this Tableau dashboard into our data set here. And again, that has been snapshotted since the beginning of the month. And what we can do here is we have the ability to create a stat data set. And the stat data set here, if I go ahead and edit how the stat data set has been created in our system, it's pretty straightforward. Initially, what you're doing is you're just deciding what is the upper and lower control limit, your standard deviation size, and the length of your moving average. From this point on, you're deciding what are the different product dimension and different hierarchies that you have within your product categories here, which is what these are. And at the end, what are the KPIs you would like to measure those standard deviation for? So in this case, we want to use all 6 KPIs that we had with this particular dashboard.
So multiple metrics across multiple dimensions. Effectively on the left there, we're running a stats model against that is calculating the standard deviations and moving averages.
And the result of that, and now we're to the next tab, and the result of that will be a report like the one that you're seeing on the screen here. So we ran this particular anomaly exception, this particular dataset anomaly report, and the result of this is there are 8 occasions on this particular day, in this case August 12th, there's 8 occasions where either one of those KPIs or many of those KPIs are giving us results outside of 3 standard deviation. The first example that we see here is the revenue for Spain, wine and champagnes. It's telling us that revenue, it will be the one that goes outside of this format. Now, however, if I want to see what's happening in the different countries, such as, let's say, Germany for the red wine, select this. The system is telling us here that sales per unit and cost per unit actually are the data points that falls outside of 3 standard deviation. And the system automatically depicted that. So now there's a couple of points here. First is this exception report is being shown here with also a link to your business intelligence dashboard in order to show you what the pre-filters areas that this particular exception has occurred. Now, if I go back to the home page again, what I'd like to do is, of course, to select this particular dashboard that we have here, this one exception report, and what I'd like to do is to add it to my webinar folder at this point.
So I think that's a critical thing that we just touched on, and it goes for our change reports, exception reports, and these statistical anomaly reports as well, is that you can tie them, if the source of that information is an existing report or dashboard in your BI tool, you can tie that back to the set of exceptions that you've uncovered, and again help users to use that tool for more analysis, but focus where they start that analysis. So lots of examples of this being used as well. We work with a telco company who are running marketing campaigns. I mentioned this up front, but they want to look at metrics related to those campaigns across many different, a lot of demographical type dimensions and filters. So what geography are customers buying in, what's the gender, the age group, the platforms they're using to purchase, blah, blah, blah. So where you have that highly dimensional data, lots of metrics, run these models to look for outliers automatically, and again, tie it back to the reports and dashboards that you have. So final play is number 6, which is our KPI alerting. It's probably very familiar to users, to people on who've looked at metric insights before, but every business is running on often time series type metrics. But there's lots of metrics, and it's difficult to see outliers in those metrics. So users who aren't monitoring them all the time are missing critical outliers. And oftentimes there's no formal way of taking resolution or taking action on any of those outliers. So again, if users are often asking all the time, well, what happened with this metric today, or what's the value of these metrics today in this particular reason, it's a classic case of implementing metrics or KPIs within the platform and then tying alerting and anomaly detection to that.
Great. So let's take a look at a KPI now, a metric in our system. So this is the metric that Mike was just talking about. In this example here, what you're looking at is daily sales, this metric of data that has been extracted from any source system, again, in order to produce this data. What you're looking at right now is looking at 4 weeks of data presented into this particular fashion. When we're loading data points and metric insights, we're loading the current values and the time when this value has been recorded. And then at this point, we're profiling all this data in order to calculate the moving average and minimum highs and lows and so on. And the result of that is the statistical view that you're seeing on the screen here. So the statistical view is meant to easily highlight the statistical anomalies. In this particular example in front of us here, we have 2 anomalies on this data points and on this particular data points because, of course, they fall outside of the standard deviation of the moving average that is represented here with this red line. Now, that is for statistical anomalies. Now, if you want to create any sets of rules in your data as well, know that it's possible with metric insights to create any sets of KPI alerting rules with the system that goes beyond threshold-based alerting, but by comparing your data points against history, volatility level band, and even combining those different types of alerting rules together in order to create complex alerting rules. So it's possible to do this. And in addition to this, when you're building this alerting rule, you can attach a workflow to this particular alerts in order to assure a closure into this particular alert. So for this particular example here, I could have created an alert where I would receive in my inbox on a daily basis an email like this one, hopefully not on a daily basis, but whenever this exception happens, in this case telling me that my particular rule has been broken and I received this particular email like this. The email is asking me to go ahead and acknowledge reception of this email. So when I do acknowledge the reception of this email, it will bring me back to the application. And in this case, it will bring me back to the screen where I have to go ahead and acknowledge that I'm actually working on this particular alert. I can change the priority. I can even decide to assign it to someone else on my team. In this case, I'd like to assign it to Dan. And when I save this this information about this particular alerts, what ends up happening is that my colleague Dan will have in his alerting inbox this particular alerts for this particular day here, and you can even see all the different alerts that has been assigned to myself or to him. And in this case here, you can see all the alerts presented in front of you for quick comprehension and moving this thing forward. So, so once this has been done, going back to the home page again, going full circle into what we've been discussing today, Mike, and now we have the different dashboards, the different types of KPIs we've been working with, and the exception reports that we have.
Yeah, so again, a lot of information this morning, but we essentially went through 6 plays here. We touched on the portal that you're looking at here, the ability to look for exceptions within data, so whether that's existing dashboards or databases that you have out there, the ability to look for changes in data, so how is data changing from one time period to the next, the ability to look at statistical exceptions within highly dimensional, lots of metrics based data, and the ability to uncover anomalies in time series metrics, your high level KPIs that you might be looking at. And then we touched on bursting. So, Louis dropped all this into a folder here that certain users have access to. And obviously, that may be something that we want to push out to users every day or on a particular schedule. So there's, again, the ability to generate that burst to be able to push it out via email or whatever format makes sense, attach PowerPoints, etc., and ensure that users are getting that when they need it. So those were the 6 plays that we wanted to cover today. Again, let's spend a few minutes on Q&A. We're a little bit over time here, but we've got time to answer some questions. Feel free to type them into the chat window or the Q&A window. I see a couple there already, and we'll get those answered. So the first one I see, Louis, is can you talk about your mobile capabilities?
Absolutely. So we do have an app that sits both on the Android and the iOS platform. You can download it from the App Store, and it's possible then to go ahead and literally using the app on your phone to connect your Metric Insights instance to be able to view your KPIs, your report, your BI dashboard, and even your alerts, and be able to receive push notification via the application as well.
Another one here, can you talk a little bit more or show data sources that you connect to?
Yes, so Metric Insights, we have the ability to connect to several different data sources. Let me go to this page here, Mike. So we have the ability to connect to pretty much any business intelligence system out there. If I select my new data sources here, any databases will be, we can connect to via JDBC driver. In addition to that, we have a long list of data connector from business intelligence tools to big data application and web-based application, all the way down to web services and scripts to be able to get this data from all those different systems.
There's a related question, REST API, web services. We have a demo of web services. I'm not sure we have one set up here, but essentially, if you have a web service, you can set that up as a data source that will again pull information or make a call to that web service on a particular schedule for that element, and we'll pull that data back. If there's interest in looking at that in more detail, we can reach out to us, either Louis or Mike at metricinsights.com. We can set one up and show you a demo. We don't have one here, but often things like weather or stock prices or whatever it might be used is available through that. We don't have a generic REST API. We are able to build plugins to any API-based source, which is what you were looking at. If I just go back to data sources here, anything that is not JDBC driven here is typically talking to a REST API or an API of some sort. And so as you have requests for new plugins, that goes into our queue and we build a plugin to that particular API. You touched on security, I think, Louis, but can you just talk a little bit more about permissions and single sign-on and security question there?
Absolutely. So I mentioned earlier that we can bring your users and users group connecting to LDAP and Advanced Directory and bring all this into the system. Most of our customers are also love to work with single sign-on, so be able to connect to SAML V2 type of provider in order to enable Metric Insight to work in a single sign-on environment. And of course, it's supported for all these platforms.
So that so the single sign-on obviously gives you access to the underlying tools when you come in, so I don't have to log into each underlying tool. And then that is also used to permission access to the data. So make sure I only get my slice of data that I'm responsible for or that I have permissions to see. Checking any more questions at this point. So I think we got through them. Last call for questions if there's any in the window. We're at 10:45 here. So we will post the recording of this webinar on the blog over the next 24 hours. We'll also send an email out with that link. Thanks for joining today. If there's any additional questions, again, you can reach out to Louis or myself directly, Louis at metricinsights.com, Mike at metricinsights.com. If there's interest in seeing that web services demo, we can set that up for you. Thanks for your time. I think we're done.
Thank you, Mike.
Bye.